Welcome to JK Tells a Story, where real-life dramas unfold. Sit back and enjoy today's tale. I was staring at my computer screen when Kate walked into the room. She'd been coming home late from work for months now, but tonight felt different. It was almost 10 o'clock. The kids and I had already finished dinner and homework. Nathan and Sophia had been asleep for nearly an hour, and for the first time they hadn't even asked where Mom was. This new pattern was breaking my heart. I'd spent the last hour going over our finances, and the picture wasn't pretty. Over the past 2 years, our income had dropped significantly, but Kate didn't seem to notice or care. She continued spending money as if we were still flush with cash. I just paid the last of our bills. We might scrape by for another couple of months. Maybe. I was also reviewing what I'd once called my life plan. Maybe I'd made a terrible mistake. For 2 years, I'd been watching what felt like a ticking time bomb, wondering when it would finally explode. I'd always assumed it would happen eventually, but now I was starting to doubt myself. I don't know how long she stood there watching me. Lately, I'd been lost in my own thoughts more and more often. Time seemed to slip away without my notice. Finally, she crossed her arms and gave me that all too familiar look of contempt. "Brad, I want a divorce." I'm not sure how I felt in that moment. My spirit was so weighed down with doubt and self-hatred that I felt almost numb to this new blow. It wasn't really funny, but I had to fight back a laugh. My wife of 17 years had just told me it was over, that everything we'd built together was finally going to be destroyed. I hadn't felt this particular emotion in a long time, and it almost made me smile. Relief that I looked at her for a moment, allowing myself one last trip back to our happy memories. Then reality snapped back into focus. Okay, I'd always been a better programmer than a manager. Unfortunately, in the tech world, programmers get promoted to project managers, then department heads, and eventually senior management. That's how I ended up as Senior Product Development Manager at Atlanta Technology Solutions. It was basically a fancy title for a salesperson, though I was probably the most qualified person for the position at the time. I'd single-handedly created our flagship product line, nurturing it from conception through 6 major updates. I knew our product better than anyone else in the company. When customers had questions, I had answers. When employees ran into problems, I knew how to solve them. Add a good haircut and an expensive suit, and I looked the part. The salary increase and benefits that came with the promotion were substantial. I was mostly happy with my job, but I missed programming. In my new role, I didn't have time to code. Too many meetings and phone calls kept me away from what I loved, actually writing lines of code. Instead, I had to watch a new generation of eager young developers trying to outdo each other with their latest innovations. I won't lie, being the boss had its perks, but I always wished the job description was different. It wasn't surprising when I got fired from Atlanta Technology Solutions. If I'd been in charge of myself, I would have made the same decision. I attended meetings sporadically at best and missed deadlines far too often. I wasn't actively trying to get fired, but I wasn't making any effort to keep my job either. The depression that followed lasted for months. It took me almost 3 months just to get out of the initial funk and try to move forward, but even that attempt was a miserable failure. It took another month to find a way out of my situation, or at least find a way to live with it. I think I would have lost my mind completely if it weren't for the kids. They had a perfect routine that helped me get my life back on track. Breakfast, school, lunch, afternoon snack, homework, dinner, bed. This became my mantra, and it helped me find my way. I threw myself into being a stay-at-home dad. I took over all the household duties and transportation responsibilities. The kids genuinely enjoyed having me around more, and it helped me realize that I still had value. I wasn't completely worthless. If Kate noticed this change in our family dynamic, she never mentioned it. I'm pretty sure she didn't even realize what was happening. I met Catherine Riley at a fraternity party during my senior year of college. I'd almost decided not to go. I joined the fraternity for the networking opportunities after graduation, not for the social scene while I was still in school. I figured I'd need all the help I could get finding a good job. My grades were excellent, so that wasn't the problem. Everything else about me was just average. Height, weight, looks, personality, completely average. Even my name, Bradley, was fairly common. Totally ordinary. Honestly, when I wasn't sitting in front of a computer, there was nothing particularly special about me. I'd had a few relationships in college, but not many. Even as a senior, I was pretty good at keeping myself company. Until I met Catherine Riley. Kate was almost as average as I was, but I quickly realized that average women were actually quite beautiful. She was a little reserved, which I found attractive. I watched her for quite a while before working up the courage to talk to her. Our first conversation was brief and quiet, but a connection was made. Over the next few weeks, we met for coffee and studied together in the library. We spent almost 2 months getting to know each other before our first real date. From that point on, it was the most incredible time of my life, 15 years of pure happiness. Our courtship was short, and our engagement even shorter. Right after graduation, we got married and moved into our first apartment in Atlanta. We rode the same MARTA train to and from work every day. We were barely making ends meet, but we were together, and that was all that mattered. We had almost everything in common: family backgrounds, dating experiences, interests, goals. Where we didn't match perfectly, we complemented each other beautifully. If I wasn't good at something, Kate excelled at it. If she had a weakness, it happened to be one of my strengths. I was better at managing our finances. Kate was better at managing our social calendar and family schedules. We worked as a team, and our lives steadily improved. Over the next few years, we were both promoted several times. Our circle of friends grew considerably. We managed to save enough money to buy our first house while still traveling and having fun together. Our relationship developed naturally over time. Kate quit her job after 8 years when our son Nathan was born. A little over a year later, our daughter Sophia arrived. We chose names that felt right for them, names that would serve them well in life. We bought a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs with room for a dog. We got a family sedan and a minivan. All in all, life was working out pretty well. 2 kids, a pet, a house, 2 cars, a perfectly normal, happy life. I didn't think I could be any happier. I was wrong. My promotion to manager came shortly after Sophia's first birthday. Suddenly, I felt like I'd been rewarded for years of being part of the anonymous masses without complaining. As I mentioned, my new salary was nothing to sneeze at. I had a flexible schedule, working from home most days and only going to the office for staff meetings and management conferences. They say money can't buy happiness, and I believe that's true. But what money can buy is better clothes, better grooming, better health care, a nicer home in a better neighborhood, and most importantly, confidence. I went from average to slightly above average. Kate went from average, whom I'd always thought was beautiful, to slightly above average, and now I thought she was absolutely stunning. Our life, which I'd always considered good, reached a new level. We started traveling more, spending quality time with the kids, and saving substantial amounts for retirement. When Sophia started elementary school, Kate decided she wanted to return to work part-time. She quickly found a position she thought she'd enjoy at a small marketing firm. She would head to the office after dropping the kids at school and be home by pickup time. It was perfect. We didn't need her salary, so we could save every penny. I calculated that by the time the kids graduated from college, we'd be able to retire very comfortably. I discovered my wife was having an affair completely by accident, just 3 months before our 15th wedding anniversary. It was right around my birthday. I actually found the evidence 2 days before my birthday. I just didn't realize what it meant at the time. It took me several weeks to piece everything together. I hadn't thought much about Kate wanting to take on more responsibilities at her new job. It meant she'd be working a few extra hours each week, and I'd have to handle more of the kids' pickup duties, but it didn't really affect my schedule, and I was happy to support her career. After about 3 months, I noticed Kate seemed distracted a lot. When I asked her about it, She said she was trying to find her place in the office and feeling a bit stressed. I decided to take on even more household responsibilities to lighten her load. When our intimate life took a downturn, we talked about it. She said she was getting older and didn't need to be as physically active as she used to be. For a few weeks, things seemed to improve, but then they declined again. I was hesitant to bring up the subject again, fearing it would lead to an argument. I was at my wit's end when I made the discovery. The weather had turned cold, and I was looking for one of my sweaters. I'd taken over most of the laundry duties and sometimes got confused about which closet things belonged in. I was going through the sweaters on the shelf in her closet when I saw it tucked behind some old shoeboxes. It was impossible to miss. A pink box with white ribbon from an upscale lingerie store. The card addressed to Beloved caught my attention immediately. A war of thoughts erupted in my mind. Should I look at it? Or wait? I decided I couldn't wait until my birthday to find out what was going on. Please excuse the wrapping this gift came in. You can unwrap the real present on your birthday when I wear what's in the box. Love, Kate. Over the next 48 hours, I went into overdrive trying to be the perfect husband. I made sure to greet her at the door with flowers, gave her foot massages, and cooked her favorite meals. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. She seemed to barely tolerate my attention. On my birthday, I made sure the kids finished their homework early. I didn't want any interruptions when Kate gave me my present. I was surprised when she came home late from work. I was even more confused when she asked what we were having for dinner, but I was willing to play along to get to my surprise. I suggested we go out for pizza. The kids were excited, and we headed out. I quietly arranged with our waitress to have the staff sing Happy Birthday before we left. I thought I saw a surprise flash across Kate's face, but she quickly recovered. "I'll give you your present later, Brad," she said with a smile. The ride home was stressful. I almost got into an accident. The 15 minutes waiting for the kids to get ready for bed felt like torture, and the 15 minutes after they fell asleep was even worse. Kate conveniently had to make an emergency trip to the store for milk just after the kids went to sleep. When I got to our bedroom, Kate wasn't there. I sat on the bed and waited. A few minutes later, she emerged from the bathroom wearing an old flannel nightgown. No makeup, with her hair pulled back in a ponytail. By this point, I was getting frustrated. When was I going to get my present? She climbed into bed and reached to turn off the lamp, then stopped. "Oh, I almost forgot." She opened the nightstand drawer and pulled out a small square box wrapped in the same colorful balloon paper we'd used for Nathan's last birthday party. "Happy birthday, darling." And that was it. She rolled over, turned off the light, and went to sleep. I was too shocked to even open the gift. The next day, depression hit me like a truck. I replayed the evening over and over, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong to ruin what should have been a special night. I was completely lost. For almost 2 weeks, I wallowed in despair. That pink box felt like it was mocking me, highlighting my failure as a husband. I'd heard all the cliches. The husband is always the last to know. But I have to admit, I really was clueless. The thought of Kate cheating on me was so foreign that I'd never even considered the possibility. But it was the first thing that came to mind when she called home 13 days after my birthday to tell me she'd be late. It's Alan's 30th birthday, and the staff is going out to celebrate. I might be late. I don't remember what I said in response as I walked to our bedroom closet, but I vividly remember looking at the empty space where my present used to be. I also remember the crushing chest pain and spending far too long vomiting in the bathroom. I thought I might be having a heart attack, and for a few moments I actually hoped I was and that it would all be over soon. Alan Henderson was Kate's boss, a slick, smooth-talking advertising executive who was a few years younger than both Kate and me. I'd only met him once, but I remembered not liking him much. He seemed fake and insincere. It was Sophia who snapped me out of my spiral. "Are you okay, Daddy?" It took me a few seconds to focus on my daughter, who was hovering over me with tears in her eyes. "I'm fine, sweetie. Daddy just ate something that didn't agree with him." "I'll be out in a minute. I just need to clean up." I eventually managed to leave the bathroom, though I don't remember much of what happened next. I do remember finding my dusty bottle of scotch. Based on my headache the next morning, I'd clearly had more than a few drinks. I had no idea when Kate came home. When I found her in the kitchen the next morning making breakfast for the kids, she looked perfectly normal, just going about her usual routine. But it was the slight wince I caught on her face when she sat down that killed whatever love I had left for her. It was subtle, but it told me everything I needed to know. I wish I could say I confronted her about the affair, but I didn't. I was just devastated. It was all I could do to function normally, and for weeks I didn't get any better. I moved through life like a zombie. Every day I realized that my wife was living her life without a care in the world while I was falling apart. I felt like I'd hit rock bottom. It wasn't until our 15th wedding anniversary approached that I finally snapped out of it and decided to take action. Honestly, I probably wouldn't have done anything at all. I was being pathetic, and I knew it. I wish I could say I was in shock or that there was some psychological term for my behavior. If my father had been alive, he would have simply said I was acting like a coward, and he would have been right. It wasn't until Kate announced she had to attend a work conference that the fog finally lifted from my mind. She would be gone during our anniversary. I don't know why that detail mattered so much to me. It was just another level of disrespect. But it hurt deeply, especially since she hadn't shown any sign that she even remembered the date. After drinking myself into oblivion on the night of our anniversary, I woke up angry. I'd reached my breaking point. I called a lawyer and made an appointment. I was going to end this charade. I was certain my life couldn't get any worse, that I was wrong. My confident attitude walking into the lawyer's office was quickly replaced by crushing reality. I knew divorce could be complicated, and I thought Kate's adultery would work in my favor. Instead, the lawyer systematically destroyed every assumption I had. I didn't have any proof of cheating. Even if I had evidence, it wouldn't matter much. Kate would still be entitled to a 50-50 split of our assets. I had no evidence that she was a bad parent, so joint custody would be the best-case scenario. The income disparity actually worked against me. I'd likely end up paying spousal support and alimony. Kate would probably get primary custody and the right to stay in the house for the children's benefit. My wife was unfaithful, and I was a fool that I went from depression to complete confusion. Kate even noticed something was wrong a few weeks later. "You really don't look well, Brad. Is something bothering you?" "No, honey." At least she pretended to care. I was just drifting through life at that point. Then I got fired. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was a news story that gave me hope. I was watching one depressing report after another, which seemed to match my mood perfectly, when this story came on. A major employer on the East Coast had gone bankrupt. Former employees were scrambling to get their final paychecks and worrying about their pensions. It seemed like some people were in worse situations than I was. Then the news anchor came back with analysis. Employees will likely win lawsuits against their former employer, but it won't matter. There's nothing left. All the money is gone. It didn't take me long to connect the dots and formulate a plan. Kate couldn't take what didn't exist. If we had nothing, there would be nothing to split. Of course, I'd be hurting myself in the process, but I was already going to lose half of everything anyway. Did I really care about the rest? My plan started simple. I was unemployed and wasn't going to look for another job. I was going to spend our savings until there was nothing left. Admittedly, it was reckless, and even I didn't think it would work completely, but it was something to hold on to. 2 years is a long time, and I was incredibly bored when I wasn't with the kids. I realized that Kate really had been the center of our social circle. When she became distant from me, I discovered I didn't have any close friendships of my own. I was an only child, and both my parents had died young. My father from a heart attack and my mother from cancer. I was truly alone. I could bore you with details of how I lived during those 2 years, but I can summarize it simply. It was horrible. My children were the only good thing in my life. I'd never been much of a spender before. I still kept receipts for everything. I started by withdrawing small amounts of cash each week and hiding it. After about 2 months, I realized we weren't spending money fast enough to make a real difference. Apparently, I was good at saving money but terrible at spending it. So I stepped up my game and made adjustments to my original plan. I enrolled in an executive MBA program at an expensive local university, paying almost $120,000 up front. I bought a luxury SUV for $60,000 cash. I fully funded the kids' college savings accounts, which took another $260,000. I spent thousands on a new wardrobe and started withdrawing cash twice a week. My routine became, drop the kids at school, hit the bank, then head to the casino. I never actually gambled the money I took, just a few dollars here and there for appearances. I spent enough to make it look like I'd been there all day, including receipts for lunch, snacks, and parking. The bulk of the money went into a wall safe in our garage, my personal post-divorce war chest in case things went badly. My other major expense was hiring a private investigator to keep permanent surveillance on Kate and her activities. I asked for everything: video, photos, daily reports. I'm ashamed to admit how much it cost me. You're probably wondering if Kate noticed any of this spending. I'd say yes, with the exception of the gambling. I had to tell her about transferring money to the kids' accounts because I needed her signature on the custodial paperwork. She saw my new car and clothes but never said anything about them. I'm sure she thought I was still working and that we were still financially comfortable. She made some purchases too, but I never commented. I often wondered who benefited more from her buying lingerie so frequently. We just never discussed it. We were polite to each other and communicated about daily necessities, but it was like living with a roommate you didn't particularly like. As for intimacy, don't even think about it. Spending time with my kids was the highlight of my existence. I did my best to support whatever interested them. We did homework together, played games, went to parks, rode bikes, and went to movies. Since I'd taken over the cooking, they seemed interested in helping me in the kitchen. I found simple recipes and let them participate. Kate usually showed up sometime during these family activities. I didn't exclude her, but I didn't try to involve her either. If she wanted to participate, she just did so without saying anything to me. I received weekly reports about Kate's activities. I'd initially thought she was just having an affair with her boss, but it turned out to involve several guys from her office. After a few months, some of the company's clients appeared in the reports as well. Did it hurt? Not really. I already suspected she was unfaithful. Having proof didn't make it hurt any more than the suspicion had. The reports weren't particularly interesting reading. In a way, I was relieved, though not by much. It was clear that Alan Henderson wasn't particularly skilled as a lover, though he seemed to enjoy sharing his discoveries with several different women. This surprised me somewhat. I'd assumed, based on Kate's behavior, that she and he had some kind of exclusive relationship, but apparently they were more like casual partners. She simply made herself available to him whenever he wanted. It was the same with most of the other 6 men involved. But there was one client, a nerdy guy with glasses who really took advantage of Kate's willingness to please. The photos and videos were too unclear to tell if she enjoyed it, but it looked quite uncomfortable to me. Despite being unemployed and dealing with all the stress, I had plenty of free time on my hands. I decided to focus on preparing for my post-marriage life, which I assumed would come eventually. I started working out seriously. I'd always been in decent shape, but nothing special. During this time, I made good progress with weightlifting and distance running. I believe great physiques and natural good looks are mostly genetic, and I clearly didn't win that lottery. However, I was very happy with the improvements I was making. I also started researching developments in my former industry. I figured I'd eventually need a job again. A year away from the tech world had left me behind the curve. I spent several hours each day learning about new technologies and software platforms. I was particularly interested in what was happening at my old company, ATS. They seemed to be stagnating, not losing market share, but not gaining momentum either. In the technology business, if you're standing still, you're falling behind. I spent considerable time studying divorce law as well. Some of my research involved devising strategies to protect myself and minimize Kate's advantages. Most of my time, however, was spent learning how divorce affects children. I'd already worked through most of my own emotional pain. The kids had been a big part of that healing process. I wanted to make sure that when their world changed, I'd be fully prepared to help them through it. There's a lot of information available on the subject, though I thought most of it was complete nonsense. 8 months into my project, I started to panic. Kate began coming home at regular times again. She started talking to me, asking about my day. I answered curtly, but she didn't seem bothered by my coldness. She began dressing more attractively for bed, as if trying to revive the intimacy we'd once shared. A few weeks later, things got even more concerning. For a year and a half, she'd been emotionally absent, doing her own thing. Now she was complaining about our lack of communication. She started talking about working on our marriage, so I stopped talking to her entirely. Complete silence. Her attempts at reconciliation continued until her birthday. I left her gift on the dining room table. The wrapping paper should have looked familiar. I'd used the same paper she'd used for my last birthday present. The contents shouldn't have been a surprise either. 6 months earlier, I'd opened the last birthday gift I'd received from Kate. It was a watch with a cheap digital display. When I spotted my birthday gift in the impulse buy section of our neighborhood Quick Trip, I was furious. A $9.95 watch from a convenience store? Seriously? But when I saw they had a matching women's model, I calmed down. I bought both watches and waited 18 months to give her hers. I wish I could have seen her reaction, but I wasn't around when she opened it. The kids and I had an emergency movie night and got home quite late. She was gone before we even got up the next morning. Suddenly, everything returned to normal. Kate started staying at the office later and later. We barely spoke when she was home. And finally, she said those words, "Brad, I want a divorce." I hoped she'd handle it quickly, but it took almost a week before I was served with her petition. It was almost laughable. Spousal support, child support, unequal distribution of property in her favor, with mental and emotional abuse listed as grounds. I waited until the following Monday before taking the kids camping. I didn't want them around when I unleashed hell. We returned 6 days later, rested and refreshed. Kate was waiting for us at home, sitting alone in the living room. She looked terrible. I think she might have had the flu. I wondered which detail had surprised her most. I'd filed for divorce on grounds of adultery. I'd requested the house, the only real property we had left, and full custody of the children. I'd asked for spousal support and child support since I was unemployed and had been providing full-time childcare for 2 years. I'd filed alienation of affection lawsuits against Kate's 7 partners. I had no illusions about winning any of them, but Georgia law allowed me to file, so I did. I'd also filed civil suits against her employer and the companies of the 3 clients who had been involved with my wife. Again, I didn't expect to win, but the negative publicity might work in my favor. Finally, I'd sent a DVD of Kate's greatest hits to her parents and best friend, so she'd know I wasn't afraid to use the evidence I had. She needed to understand the full scope of what I knew. Everything was listed in my countersuit, but I didn't want to take any chances. The children had their snack and went to their rooms to get ready for bed. They completely ignored their mother, and she made no attempt to acknowledge them. I grabbed a beer from the refrigerator, then settled into the chair across from Kate in the living room. She didn't look at me for a long time. I just enjoyed my beer. Besides looking sick, she seemed to be crying about something. Maybe she was hurt. Eventually, she spoke, but barely above a whisper. "You're going to ruin me." I waited for her to look up so she could see the expression in my eyes when I answered. It took a few seconds. God, I hope so. I thought this moment would be more dramatic. When a single tear appeared in her eye and rolled down her cheek, I felt Nothing. Do you hate me that much? Oh no, Kate. I don't hate you. Hating takes effort, and I can honestly say I put absolutely no effort into thinking about you. All my effort goes into taking care of myself and my children. But I'm your wife. Stop. I'm not going to let someone like you tarnish my wife's good name. My wife was a loving, caring woman. My best friend, my partner, and the mother of my children. She's gone, and you're the person who took over her body. Don't pretend you have anything to do with me. It was a long time before she spoke again. What am I supposed to do now? Is that a rhetorical question? Or do you actually want my answer? I didn't let her respond before continuing. I suppose you have several options. You could go far, far away and try to start a new life. That's what I'd choose if I were you. I'll never let my kids spend any meaningful time with you, so that shouldn't affect your decision to leave. Or you could try staying here, hanging around town, trying to keep your head up. But who knows who'll hear about your little adventures? Or who'd want to hire someone with your reputation? Maybe you'll hook up with some loser who doesn't care about your past. But what kind of loser would that be? Or you could end it all. I really hope you don't choose that option. It would deprive me of watching you face the consequences of your choices. But then again, I'm not sure my opinion matters to someone like you. It certainly didn't matter when you were busy destroying our family. I got up and left the room. I thought I'd feel satisfaction from that confrontation, but instead, I felt empty. Life after the divorce turned out better than I'd expected. The lawsuits went much better than I'd hoped. I received just over $1 million in settlements from 3 companies whose employees had been involved with Kate. This surprised me because my lawyer had told me not to expect much. During our post-case analysis, we concluded that once word spread about Kate's company, they didn't want to deal with the negative publicity. We systematically destroyed her employer through discovery motions, depositions, and strategic media leaks. I also launched my own covert campaign, emailing the CEOs of their remaining clients with detailed information about Kate, her boss, and their colleagues. Do you really want to be associated with this company when everything hits the fan? Took time, but gradually their revenue dried up. Employees who didn't want to be associated with the scandal quit. Eventually, they filed for bankruptcy. Alan Henderson was fired and left town in disgrace. The $200,000 settlement I received was smaller than my other victories, but much more satisfying. I got nothing from the alienation of affection lawsuits. I hadn't expected to. However, for other wives filed for divorce after learning about their husband's affairs, so there was some justice in that. It wasn't all smooth sailing. I got hurt in the process too. It wasn't uncommon for me to run into someone who knew my situation. The taunts and gossip got out of hand for a while. I don't know if it was fortunate or not, but I didn't care. I already felt like a failure, so other people's words couldn't hurt me much. Some of those people were genuinely cruel. I managed to keep my kids safe from most of the fallout. That had always been my main concern. They were sad for a while but recovered well. My biggest victory was returning to ATS as Vice President of Design and Development. Getting back to programming was one way to take my mind off my personal problems. In 2 intensive years, I developed an add-on to the core ATS software that allowed seamless integration with 2 other popular competitor platforms. I started my own company and began licensing my development. Less than a year later, I received acquisition offers from all 3 companies. I sold my company for $11 million and received an incredible compensation package from ATS. I'd been considering early retirement, but given my complete lack of a social life, I was sure I'd become a hermit if I didn't have a reason to leave the house every day. My new income allowed me to hire a wonderful older woman to serve as housekeeper and caregiver for the children. A year later, Mrs. Elena Martinez moved in with us full-time, settling into an apartment above the garage in our new house. She became like a grandmother to my children, mostly sweet and kind, but firm when necessary. What I valued most was the wisdom she could share with them, the kind that only comes from life experience. I loved my children and did my best to be a caring, attentive father, But I was also damaged, bitter, and cold. I relied on Mrs. Martinez for guidance when making important decisions. The children grew up and became adults. I saw them and their families occasionally, but unfortunately, our closeness faded over time. I didn't resent them for this. It was better to keep some distance so my bitterness wouldn't affect their lives. Mrs. Martinez worked for me until the kids left for college, then retired. I offered her free room and board as a pension. She was a constant presence in my life for 15 years, always trying to get me to start living again and find someone to share my life with. I appreciated her efforts, but she eventually passed away knowing I would always be alone. I never opened up to anyone else. My friendships remained shallow and unfulfilling. I never dated, except for a few group dinners organized by well-meaning friends. I developed a well-deserved reputation as a cold, ruthless person who wasn't to be crossed. For the most part, I was avoided and I blamed no one but myself. My growing wealth allowed me to maintain relationships with professional companions. I paid generously for their time and company. Mostly, I kept things brief and impersonal, but there was one I genuinely connected with. Her name was Candy. I later learned it was actually Mary Beth. I think I meant more to her than just another client, but I could never burden someone else with my emotional baggage. When I sensed she was getting too attached, I ended things. It was better that way. If you're wondering what happened to Kate, she had a very difficult life. She tried to contact me for almost a year. I never understood why. Did she think we could reconcile? Was she hoping for a relationship with my children? I'd given her fair warning, but she didn't listen. She tried to stay in Atlanta, and I made that impossible. When she applied for jobs, I made sure her employment history became public knowledge. When she started dating, which happened almost immediately, I sent detailed packages to her potential partners with information about the woman they were getting involved with. I didn't care if they wanted to keep her around after learning the truth, but I wasn't going to let her rewrite history by hiding it. I had to live with the consequences of her actions every day, so it was only fair that she did too. My ex-wife continued her campaign of unanswered phone calls and emails I never read or responded to. I think some sick part of me wanted her to suffer for a while. I suppose early intervention with professional help would have been appropriate. It might have saved some part of my soul and allowed me to get back on track. But I never went, and as time passed, it began to feel too late to change anything. I could have changed my phone number, but I didn't. I could have had an assistant handle my mail, but I always did it myself. I could have blocked her emails. That would have prevented me from accidentally seeing her desperate attempts at communication. It was a constant stream of apologies that meant nothing. The situation was spiraling out of control. She'd always loved me. Hadn't she? Hadn't she suffered enough? I responded with a gift and a simple note. I bought lingerie from her favorite store and wrapped it carefully in sheer white ribbon that really brought out the pink of the box. I included a handwritten note. I'm sure she appreciated the irony when she opened the card addressed to someone I no longer recognized. I hope she understood my message. I thought go to hell was pretty clear. One of her potential boyfriends actually tried to hold me accountable for tormenting my ex-wife. He showed up at my doorstep, full of liquid courage, and shoved me when I opened the door, knocking me down. That was his mistake. As I've mentioned, I'm nothing special. I had no martial arts training or military background. I was just a regular guy who'd never been violent. Hell, I'd never even been in a real fight. But what I did have was pure, undiluted rage. Years of unspent hatred for my wife and her lovers. He became the unfortunate target of all that fury. I ended up with a bruised face and a cracked rib. He was lucky to be alive. He pleaded guilty to assault and trespassing and got probation as a first-time offender. I think the months of reconstructive surgery and rehabilitation made a bigger impression on him than the legal consequences. Kate never tried to contact me again after that incident. I stopped following her activities after another year, when she found steady work cleaning rooms at a budget hotel in a small town about 700 miles away in rural Virginia. The only time I saw her again was 16 years later. At my daughter's wedding, I knew the children had reconnected with Kate a few years after college graduation. I made no attempt to stop them from finding her. They were adults and could make their own decisions. The years hadn't been kind to her. She'd gained at least 20 pounds and had deep wrinkles around her mouth from what I assumed was a new smoking habit. Overall, she looked old and worn down. But underneath it all, I could still see the woman I'd once given my heart to. I felt nothing for her, but I recognized her. She sat alone near the back of the church. Her interaction with Sophia was brief, polite, but distant. She made no attempt to speak to me during the evening. We never came within 30 feet of each other. She was standing outside waiting for a cab when I noticed the ring on her finger. I smiled for the first time in years. Maybe she'd found something better than what I had. Judging by the simple gold band and modest diamond on her left hand, I walked over and looked at it for a moment. When I raised my head and met her eyes, I saw deep sadness there. "By the way," I said quietly, "you ruined my life first." I looked at her left hand, then back into her eyes. "I'm glad you found someone. I hope he makes you happy." I walked quickly to my car, where my driver was already waiting. "Good evening, Mr. Thompson. I hope you had a pleasant evening, sir. Are we going to the club?" "It went as well as I could have hoped, Jonathan. Let's go straight home. I think I'd like to be alone tonight." "Of course, sir." As we pulled away, I tried not to look back, but I caught a brief glimpse of her standing there. "Goodbye, Kate. Goodbye, Brad." Bradley Thompson was not a handsome man. There was nothing remarkable about him at first glance, but he was very sweet, nice to look at, smart, and different from other guys. Our first meeting happened on probably the worst night of my college life. My sorority sisters dumped me in the middle of a frat party. They promised that we would stick together all night, but jumped at the first chance to fool around with someone in the popular crowd. I waited for them for 2 hours while a bunch of drunk guys hit on me. When he finally approached me, Brad looked straight into my eyes. He politely introduced himself and made small talk for a few moments. He spoke almost in a whisper, but his eyes never left mine. After a while he left. "It was a pleasure talking to you, Catherine. I'd like to take you out for coffee sometime. Here's my name and phone number if you're interested. Thank you for talking to me." It was the highlight of my semester. Admittedly, I almost didn't call him. I waited a little over a week before I decided what to do. We met for a cup of coffee. He asked me all sorts of questions. I found him very easy to talk to. It was during that first conversation that I realized what made him unique. Outwardly, he was quiet and unassuming. He wasn't bad-looking. Perhaps he was even a little handsome, but he was brilliant. That much was obvious. He could talk about any topic and was well-versed in all the questions I asked him. He said he was studying computer science, but obviously he could have chosen any other major. We started talking about my subjects, especially the ones I had trouble with, particularly ancient philosophy. I was majoring in business and advertising. Unfortunately, I had put off a few of my least favorite electives, and I was having a little more difficulty than I had hoped. Brad never took his eyes off me, just like our first meeting. He looked me straight in the eye the entire time we were talking. His motive was clear. He was genuinely interested in me as a person. I was flattered. He suggested we study together in the student union or in the library. So 3 days later, we were together again. I wouldn't call it studying. I'd rather call it advanced tutoring. Brad spent 3 hours in the library on Friday night giving me the help I needed to do well on my philosophy exam. When I didn't understand something, he would apologize for his teaching methods and try something different. He was so patient. He never made me feel stupid when I didn't understand something. I could feel his excitement on the phone when I called him to tell him I passed the exam the following Tuesday. I could tell he was proud of me. He accepted no praise for helping me, saying that he was actually being selfish in trying to spend time with me and that it was the most enjoyable time he had spent on campus. I also learned about how Brad was different from the other guys. During the week, he was solely focused on his studies. There were no parties, no drinking, nothing that could be considered a distraction. At first I was annoyed by it, but then it started to appeal to me. For the next few weeks we didn't go on any dates that I would call real, but he called every day just to talk to me and see how I was doing. He would leave me notes to let me know he was thinking about me. We still met for coffee or at the library, and once or twice we had lunch together. When we were together, he continued to ask questions about me and my family, my interests and dreams. If I asked him questions, he was open and honest. One day I asked him if he was afraid of anything. It was my favorite dating question. I read in a magazine that this question helps you understand how much a person trusts you. I was prepared for the typical guy answers. In the past, they ranged from nothing to leaving college without getting laid. Brad just sat silently for a minute, staring into space. Then he looked me in the eye and said, "I'm afraid I won't be a good father. I was an only child. My mother and father died when I was in high school, but we were never very close. I lived with my uncle until I graduated high school. He was a womanizer and we had very little in common. I think he was relieved when I left for college. I want to get married. I want kids, but I don't have the experience of living in a loving, supportive family. I want to be a good father, but I'm afraid I don't know how." When he fell silent, I think he was looking for some kind of answer too. "Too much?" he asked. "No, Brad, not too much. Just enough." About 4 weeks into our relationship, Brad asked if I had Saturday free. I replied that I was, and he said he would stop by the sorority at lunchtime. The days leading up to that Saturday were strange. I kept asking Brad what he was planning. He wouldn't tell me. My sorority sisters kept smiling at me and whispering. I was on edge. When he finally arrived, he was dressed in maroon and sky blue clothes. His 3 fraternity brothers were similarly dressed and were carrying a large cooler and 2 huge trays of food. Brad held a DVD in one hand and a West Ham jersey for me in the other, and a smile shone on his face. He asked me to show him the big room of the house. When we turned the corner, most of the house was dressed in West Ham colors and started chanting. I was shocked. Once, for maybe 30 seconds, I had complained about missing my family's trip to England. I had a distant cousin who made the club team West Ham United, and my family had planned a trip to London to see him play. Unfortunately, the trip fell on a very important test week for me, and I was unable to go. I was very disappointed and shared this with Brad. He had asked a friend at a local sports bar to record the West Ham game by satellite. He studied the team chants, taught them to his friends and my sorority sisters, and watched the game so he knew when to start them. He and his friends brought several cases of English ale and cooked fish and chips. As the game went on, we sang, drank, and cheered. In the 72nd minute, he silenced everyone and told me to pay attention to the screen. I was able to see my cousin score his first Premier League goal. Delayed recording, of course, but no one else in my family could have said that. It was the nicest thing anyone has ever done for me. When it was over, he and his friends cleaned up after themselves and hit the road. Brad said he would call me later. I was left alone to fight off the taunts about the dreamy look in my eyes. It was worth it. Our phone conversations, notes, and coffee continued for a couple more weeks until one day while sipping a latte I noticed he looked extremely nervous. "Everything okay, Brad?" "What? Oh yeah, of course it is. I was just wondering if you had any plans for Friday night, and if you're free, if you'd like to have dinner with me. You know, like a date. With me. Friday night. I'd love to have dinner with you, Brad." The look of relief on his face was surprising. It was quickly replaced by one of the widest smiles I'd ever seen. It was on his face as he finished his coffee, as we walked out the door, and as he turned around to give me one last wave as he walked to class. I could see him almost a block away. From that moment on, everything around me was a perfect whirlwind of love, romance, and friendship. I did better in school than I ever had before. I was having more fun than I ever had in my life. People started treating me differently too. I was more comfortable being myself, the woman Brad loved, and I think people were attracted to that. I will say that being around Brad was like getting daily vitamins for the ego. He may have always underestimated himself, but he was never shy about describing me in the best terms. In fact, it was probably just the opposite. Brad was a pretty good-looking guy who was fit, if not a little athletic. He was always well-groomed, bordering on classy. He was pleasant to be around and liked everyone, but was a little shy around new people. I could say without a doubt that he was always the smartest person in the room, including the professors, and everyone knew it. But with a casual demeanor, he avoided the limelight and attention. He often told me he was just a regular guy who won the lottery when he met me. I would describe myself as pretty. My friends described me as cute. My family described me as cute. I was always a little self-conscious about my looks and my body. It was hard not to be. Some of my sorority sisters were gorgeous with model looks and matching bikini bodies. But it was hard not to feel like I possessed something special when looking at myself through Brad's eyes. I could tell that the longer I was with Brad, the more valuable I felt. I was over the moon when it was time for prom. One of the silly end-of-year sorority rituals was playing Rate the Boyfriend. Being one of the few sisters without a long-term boyfriend, I was never able to partake in it. It was a favorite event for a large group of alumni, and it was always well attended. It was simple enough. Each sister would come out alone in front of the assembled alumni and could give a positive or negative example of another sister's boyfriend from the past year. The sister whose boyfriend received the most positive comments won. I can't say I was completely shocked by the result, but I was a little shocked. For the first time in the 29-year history of this event, my Brad received all positive feedback, one from each sister. I had never felt so proud and was a little disappointed that traditionally I wouldn't be able to let him know he had one. 3 days later, I did find a way to reward him. The day after graduation, Brad drove me home. I was originally from Marietta, and Brad had been offered a job in Atlanta. We spent 2 hours on the road holding hands and talking. We stopped for a quick breakfast and a kiss. We arrived at my childhood home just before lunch. Brad spent the next 2 hours charming my parents. I was a little surprised when he asked if he could buy my dad a beer. They left before I could even object. My mom smiled through misty eyes. "Oh, Catherine, this one's a keeper." "Trust me, Mom, I know." Brad and Dad smiled and laughed all the way to the front door when they finally returned 2 hours later. Brad told me he'd be back to pick me up for dinner after he checked into the hotel, said a quick goodbye to my parents, and left. The last thing he told me was that he had asked my father for permission to marry me. That night I'll never forget. It was magical. After a wonderfully romantic Italian dinner, Brad proposed to me on the observation deck of the Westin Peachtree Plaza. It was a beautiful, clear evening, and the lights of the Atlanta skyline almost matched the glow in my heart. Being a virgin in college always caused mild embarrassment. I'm sure I was the only sister from the sorority left in the house, but that night it was a precious gift, part of the matching set. Brad gave himself to me that night. I could feel it. He was patient, loving, and tender. I couldn't have dreamed of a more perfect first experience. I asked him where he'd learned to be such a fantastic lover. Modest as ever, he whispered, "I read a lot." Our life was damn near perfect. Right after graduation, Brad landed a good job. He was constantly being promoted, and I was happier than ever. I don't want to downplay these years or understate their importance to me. I can't find the words to express how happy I was in our first decade together. I wouldn't be able to describe how having children added to my life. I don't share the details of those years because they have nothing to do with my downfall. In fact, telling you about those years would only confuse you about the motivations that led to my fall. I know what my mistakes were, no, better said, crimes. I know why I fell. I didn't trust Brad enough. What I loved most about Brad was that despite his reserved nature, he never hid his deepest feelings from me. He shared his vulnerabilities and insecurities with me in ways he didn't with anyone else. Even though he was naturally private, he opened himself to me completely. For a long time I had nothing to hide. My life was a fairy tale. My family was wonderful. Brad never treated me any differently than a full partner. I was involved in every decision that affected our lives. It didn't matter that he made 5 times as much as me or had a better handle on our finances. He always looked to me for advice and approval. Mostly it made me feel special, but sometimes I felt inadequate, like I wasn't holding up my end of the bargain. I never shared this with Brad. If I had shared it, I never would have ruined my life. He would have helped me. I know that. He loved me so much he would have helped me feel whole. That tiny insecurity grew and grew over the years. Maybe it was nagging, whatever the case. By the time the kids went to school, I was lost in my own skin. I felt I needed something different, something that would give me an independent purpose. I wasn't looking for a lover by any means. I loved my husband. In the bedroom, I was more than satisfied. Our life was passionate, though maybe a bit routine. That was mostly my fault. I knew that my husband wanted to be a little more experimental, which is probably the right word, but I figured, why spoil a good thing? No, I wanted to feel like an equal, not just to be treated as an equal. So I found a job and announced that I'd accepted it. I had it all figured out. I was fully prepared to defend my reasons for wanting the job. Our argument lasted 4 seconds. I think that sounds wonderful, Catherine. Whatever makes you happy. And it worked. I solved my problem on my own. I didn't need any help. The sheer vanity of my thoughts in those first few months made me sick afterward, but it was exciting at the time. I felt like I could go out into the world as an independent and confident woman. The mood in our office could be characterized as flirtatious at best. It could be described as a den of debauchery at worst. My coworkers, both male and female, were young, brash, and energetic. There were a few inter-office flings between them. There were no relationships. No one seemed to hide it or think there was anything wrong with it. My boss was probably the worst of the lot. Alan Henderson was a pretty good-looking guy, though not exactly my type. People were always teasing him, saying he couldn't keep a girl, and congratulating him on another conquest. I didn't rush into bed with the first guy who hit on me. In fact, I blew him off hard. But it made me wonder if Brad and I were missing something in our lives. Our group of friends was pretty low-key when it came to this. There wasn't a single conversation in our neighborhood that even came close to the daily barrage I heard at the office. After our first company Christmas party, when I introduced Alan to Brad, my life changed forever. I could tell they disliked each other, even though they pretended to get along just fine. I stopped talking to Brad about my work and never mentioned Alan. I could tell that my job and boss were bothering him. After that night, I noticed things had changed in the office as well. Alan started paying a lot of attention to me, praising my work in public and asking how I was feeling. He started asking me to share lunch with him. We always had long discussions about our latest project. He started asking my opinion more and more often. Then he would ask a few personal questions, and we would end the conversation and get back to work. He also started complimenting me on my looks. In hindsight, I can say that he worked on me for months, and I absorbed it like a fool. I don't remember the exact series of events that led up to this. It is with the deepest regret that I admit I enjoyed every minute of it. Alan's skillful seduction made me feel desirable, emotions that I thought were long gone. Years later, analyzing my behavior, I realized the depth of my betrayal. I didn't feel Brad desired me because I didn't give him anything to desire. I knew the kind of man he was. He would never do anything that would make me feel uncomfortable. I was his true partner and cherished lover, not his girlfriend for fun. But he was very perceptive. The slightest hint on my part would be enough. Any hint that I wanted something else would have had dramatic consequences. A painful analysis of my married life revealed that Brad was obviously gingerly fumbling for any opportunity to energize our lives, and I was ignoring him. That I am terribly ashamed to admit that I did all this and more for Alan. Turns out I was nothing to him. I got too deep into my relationship with Alan before I realized the truth. I gave Alan everything for his birthday. The contrast with Brad was striking and changed my thinking almost immediately. Alan didn't love me, and I was making a terrible mistake. I told Alan that our affair was over the very next day. He laughed and pushed me out of his office. The package was on my desk when I returned from lunch, along with a note to be in Alan's office at 5:30. The contents of the package guaranteed my compliance. The pictures Alan had became a lock that chained me to him and the hell my life would become for the next year and a half and beyond. Having fun with my two coworkers who were waiting for me in Alan's office was very pleasant compared to what I would have to do during those 18 months. Let me just say that I was the company entertainment and Alan was my pimp, and I hated him almost as much as I hated myself. I tried my hardest to find a way out and kept failing. It was only when I could no longer accept the immorality of my actions that the solution to my problems came by itself. When I was asked to entertain a particular client in a conference room full of people, I realized I'd had enough. I had found the solution that had eluded me for so long. Courage. I told Alan I'd had enough, and I didn't care who he showed the pictures to. He just laughed, and it was over. I felt so stupid. I have to say that when I woke up from my nightmare, I was surprised at the state of our house. Brad and the kids seemed to be doing just fine without me. In the back of my mind, I thought they would have a hard time facing life under the kind of neglect I had imposed on them, but it turned out to be exactly the opposite. It seemed as if I wasn't needed at all. Brad was clearly on top of things. He had a new car, new clothes, and looked like a successful executive. I felt terrible when I realized how long I had neglected my family. I decided right then and there that I would rededicate my life to them and do everything I could to make amends for my betrayal. But a distance had formed between us that had never been there before. I often wondered how long it had lasted. Brad never raised his voice to me. We never fought, but he treated me like an intruder. I decided I needed to put my best foot forward. I tried to seduce him, nothing worked. He barely touched me. After a few months, I looked at the state of our marriage. No intimacy, no communication. I decided I couldn't live like this. I suggested marriage counseling. Then Brad stopped talking to me. I don't mean he stopped trusting me, he just stopped talking. Not a word for weeks. I was on edge. When my birthday came around, I let myself get a little excited. After all, he couldn't ignore me on my birthday. God, how wrong I was. When I got home from work, I was ready to find out what my family had planned, but found the house empty. The only thing on the dining room table was a small wrapped box. I realized what it was before I even opened it. A few years earlier, I had forgotten Brad's birthday. In a panic, I found an inexpensive watch at a store on a nearby street. I intended to rectify my oversight later, but I never did and eventually forgot about it. My gift was a mistake, but his gift was calculated. By the time I went to bed, I was furious. Keeping the kids away from me on my birthday was just cruel. I couldn't believe he had done that to me. And the gift, that was out of line. I should have realized something was terribly wrong. The symbolism should have been enough. Brad was not an evil man, but he must have been because his reaction wasn't what I expected. No yelling, no questions. Okay. And that was it. The following Friday, he was served with my divorce petition. That weekend, Brad was in a better mood, but if he tried to correct his recent behavior, it was too late. I was in no mood for reconciliation. He even said goodbye to me at the door as I left for work Monday morning. Too little, too late, I thought. When I got to the office, I realized there was a big problem, but I had no idea what it was. My boss, the president of the company, and our corporate lawyer were arguing in the conference room. Fists full of papers were being waved around. I was so busy watching the hysteria that I didn't notice the man waiting for me near my workstation. He caught me off guard when he spoke. Catherine Smith? Yes. You're being served. The man handed me a massive envelope, took my picture, and left. I didn't even get a chance to sit down, let alone look at the contents of the envelope. As soon as the man left, the security guard and the human resources manager stood in front of me. Mrs. Smith, You were suspended pending an investigation on charges of inappropriate behavior in the workplace. Please gather your personal belongings and leave the building. It was humiliating to have to gather my belongings while my coworkers looked on. It was even worse when I was escorted out of the building. I had no idea what was going on. I barely had time to pull out of the parking lot when my phone rang. It was my lawyer. Before I could even say hello, she had already let me know that withholding important information and making her look like an idiot were the only phrases that made sense. I drove home in silence. When I arrived, the house was empty again. I had no idea what hell I had unleashed until I finally calmed down enough to remember the envelope. Brad's counterpetition was crushing. Almost all of my extramarital affairs were documented. There was no money. He had spent almost all of our savings. The word that hit me the hardest was adultery. I thought it couldn't get any worse. Then I tried calling my parents. I needed support. My father called me a terrible name and hung up on me. He didn't need to explain to me why he thought that. I already knew. The next 7 days seemed like the loneliest of my life, but years later I would remember them fondly as the good days. Brad left a note, which I found later, saying he had taken the kids camping and would be back on Sunday. That first night, my older friend Rebecca called around 7 o'clock to see how I was doing. She said that Brad had sent her a DVD and that I didn't want to know what was on it. Over the next few days, my attorney detailed the hopelessness of my situation. I was being fired for cause. My company, several clients, and all of my partners were being sued. I would lose custody of my children. I would lose everything. At that moment, I was willing to do anything to get Brad to stop all the litigation. I tried to prepare myself for his return. Unfortunately, I couldn't stop crying. When the family came home, I was a mess. The kids walked past me as if I wasn't even in the room. Brad walked in a few minutes later, beer in hand. Looking like he didn't give a damn, I barely forced myself to speak. "You're going to ruin me." The pure hatred in his voice destroyed me. God, I hope so. When I tried to broach the subject of our history as husband and wife, he called me terrible names. At that point, I wasn't even talking to him. I was just thinking out loud. But Brad launched into a tirade that lasted several minutes. Every word tore at me. I cried. Then he got up and left the room. I can honestly say that I didn't give up. I tried to make things work with Brad, but he wouldn't talk to me. I wondered how Brad and the kids were doing without money, but it seemed to be okay. Sometimes I would sneak to watch him drop them off or pick them up from school. I couldn't get a job and was receiving unemployment benefits. My parents wouldn't talk to me. I needed somewhere to live and started going from friend to friend, mostly divorced men. No one wanted to keep me for long. One day everything was fine, and the next day they wanted me gone. On the advice of my lawyer, I started seeing a therapist. She believed that if I repented of my behavior and tried to get professional help on my own, it would help me in court. I had very little hope. I was able to work through some things, most of which I have shared with you, but the best advice my therapist gave me was at the end of our sessions. Her advice was to run far, far away. I don't know exactly why he decided to respond to me. It could have been a phone call, an email, or even one of the dozens of letters I sent. But for whatever reason, I came home and found a package from Brad waiting for me. I immediately recognized the store's standard gift box. The card was addressed to me in a rather vulgar manner. I understood everything. He knew almost everything. He really hated me and had a very specific suggestion on how I could best utilize my time. I don't know why the realization that he knew about my willing betrayal was so much worse, but it was. I cried hard. At the time, I was staying with a friend of a friend of a friend, a decent guy named Robert. I think he wanted our relationship to be more than just a roommate thing. When he came into the room to see what was up, I realized he had been drinking. When he saw the package, he became furious and sprinted out the door before I could stop him. I was worried when Robert wasn't home a few hours later. I should have been. The nurses at the hospital weren't verbose, but they knew most of the story. Apparently, Robert had gone to confront Brad. Brad had nearly beaten him to death. His face was mangled, he had a concussion, several internal injuries, and a shattered left hip. I was terrified. My problems were now infecting those around me. At my next session, I told this story to my therapist. She started asking me questions about Brad. I told her everything I knew. He was an only child. He had no family. He was orphaned when he was a teenager. I told her about our young love, his devotion to me and the children. I told her about his actions during the 2 years when he should have known about my infidelity and subsequent behavior. And I told her about what Brad had done to Robert. When I finished, she looked terrified. You have to run as far away from here as you can. Leave him alone. Don't call him. Don't write to him. Don't let him know where you are. There is no hope of reconciliation. Don't even try. Move on. If you push him, the most likely outcome is that he will kill you. Your actions have clearly broken a man with a fragile grip on sanity. He's endured disappointment after disappointment all his life. He will never forgive you. He will never forget. Run. And I ran. I ran away from the memories of my perfect life to a college town in Virginia, where I found a job. A few years later, I found a man who could tolerate me and ignore my past. The best thing I can say about him is that he didn't smell or hit me. There was no love between us, just a friendly relationship. I'm sure that was part of my punishment. My children contacted me when they were older, just to say hello and let me know they were alive and knew I was too. They never asked to see me or play any meaningful role in their lives. Brad thrived without me. I followed his news as much as I could. He was always a superstar in the software industry and had the vast fortune to prove it. There was hardly anything written about his personal life. I saw him one more time at my daughter's wedding. I was surprised that I was invited. He looked amazing. He looked like the man who owned my heart and whom I had betrayed. I'll admit I was a little startled when he approached me for his final words. By the way, you ruined my life first. He stared at my simple wedding ring. At that moment, I regretted never wearing anything more meaningful on my finger. I'm glad you found someone. I hope he makes you happy. And then he was gone. Thank you for your viewing. See you next time. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to JK Tells a Story for more tales.